Do you want to know what the difference is between tax evasion and tax avoidance? Well, one of them will get you federal prison time. Ask Wesley Snipes that one. Tax evasion is not what you want to do. Now, many of you may have either filed your tax return or put your tax return on extension and may have looked at your tax return and be like, shoot, man, why am I paying so much money to the federal government? And might even be frustrated by it, right? And then you see companies like Amazon, Google, and now including Uber paying little to minimal tax on the income that they've made, billions of dollars of income. And you sit there and you wonder, how are these big boys able to do this? How can I be able to do this? Anyway, there's an article that came out recently on how Uber used over 80 different shell companies to avoid taxation on over $6 billion of income. And you're probably sitting there wondering, how did they do that? And if you're wondering how they did that, let's stay tuned and I'll share with you exactly how they did it. Hey, how's it going? As always, my name is Eric. It's good to see you again. Thanks for popping on the channel. Before I get started, I would love to hear your thoughts and your comments on, do you think the biggest corporations in America are paying too much in tax or too little in tax? Put that in the comment section below. Are the biggest corporations in America paying too much or too little in tax? Now, I asked that question because a lot of us may have either already filed our tax return or are in the process of filing our tax return if you got an extension. And you might be like, man, I'm paying a lot of money in tax here. And then we've seen articles come up all the time about how Amazon doesn't pay anything in federal tax, how Google doesn't pay anything in federal tax, and yet us, the little guys, have to pay in tax. Well, recently, there's an article that came out on Uber, everyone's favorite drive-sharing company. They're officially in the Champions League of tax avoidance. They are like they're way up there in terms of their skill level, right? And they're using 50 Dutch shell companies to dodge taxes on nearly $6 billion of revenue. $6 billion with a B. And you're probably sitting there wondering, how did they do that? And are they legitimately doing this? Like, is this legal or is it illegal? Now, I want to give you some context. I've been a tax advisor and a tax strategist for over 10 years now. And when you deal with a different strata of income, like folks making millions of dollars plus per year, they have the resources and the ability to hire accountants, attorneys, international accountants, international attorneys to be able to put the structures together to make things like this work, where the average American can't really utilize this because these types of structures cost millions of dollars to set up and millions of dollars per year to maintain it. But if you're saving $100, $200, $300 million a year in income tax, it's drastically worth it. But for an average American, it doesn't work. But let's break down exactly how did they do that and what this is all about. So as you scroll down, Uber, despite earning $5.8 billion in global revenue, Uber claimed a $4.5 billion loss for tax purposes, right? So they had $5.8 billion of revenue, but $4.5 billion loss for tax purposes. That is a swing of over $10 billion to go from collecting revenue to being at a loss. So let's break it down a little bit more. Uber's been using a complex tax shelter involving about 50 different Dutch shell companies to reduce its global tax bill. They claimed in 2019 $4.5 billion in global operating losses, excluding US and China, for tax purposes. But the reality is they brought in $5.8 billion in operating revenue. And this has been talked about before. We've known about this. A Forbes article in 2017 was talking about this. So this should be no surprise. Big corporations like Uber, especially tech companies which don't really necessarily need US-based operations or equipment, they can license intellectual property overseas, are able to use this, and they call this the double Dutch sandwich. Now, this might sounds like something that you're going to buy at a bar. All right, I'm going to grab a beer and a double Dutch sandwich. Can you make it medium rare, right? Or extra cheese. That's what it sounds like. But it's a really complex way of basically shifting income and utilizing intellectual property to offset your actual income. So here's a couple of pieces to it, and I'll visually explain how it works. So Uber basically transfers intellectual property, that's trademarks, software, things like that, things that aren't tangible. So not like phones or computers or TVs, not hardware, but intellectual property, trademarks, patents, software, these things. They transferred through a $16 billion loan from one of its subsidiaries in Singapore that in turn owns one of the Uber Dutch shell companies, a maneuver that grants the company $1 billion in tax breaks each year for the next 20 years, right? So what we're dealing with right now is many of us are interfacing with the tax code as a U.S. citizen earning income in the United States. And so we're just staying in what we call one jurisdiction. So the tax code is pretty clear on what it does. Now, if you are a multinational, a large corporation, you could interface on multiple different jurisdictions and pick and choose where you want to set up your company to take advantage of those jurisdictions' tax advantages, right? So in the past, companies use companies like or countries like Ireland or Isle of Man or Monaco or Singapore or Hong Kong, Panama, like all these companies that have significant tax advantages for being part of. And if you're a corporation, they have their own isolated like pockets of different countries that you can participate in where you can really take advantage of that country's tax code. So what they did is they supercharged the tax avoidance approach by using an intellectual property tax break to prevent future tax bills, turning it into a much more useful, viable structure in the Netherlands. They also found that certain Dutch subsidiaries hadn't submitted mandatory financial reports, and in India, they paid less than a third of the 6% tax the country imposes on multinational corporations, according to the report. Here you go. We have companies that are making profits. This is why there's, a little bit of a breakdown in capitalism here, folks, my friend. There's a little bit of a breakdown here because capitalism, the nature of capitalism is to find the most efficient ways to utilize capital. And here's a situation where a company is making a lot of profit in a country that they're operating, but they're paying less than a third of the tax that should be levied upon them because they're using complex structures. Now you have two sides of the story. You have the one side of the story is like, well, they should be paying their fair share. If I'm paying income tax, if I'm paying the federal government every year, shouldn't a corporation pay it? And then you have the other side, the capitalist side, that says, well, taxation is theft, so they should pay as little as possible. There needs to be a balance somewhere in the middle because companies like Uber are utilizing the people, the resources, the streets of that country. They should be paying their fair share of tax. At least that's my impression, right? India is in desperate need of public revenue to help it combat COVID, yet companies like Uber are able to avoid contributing through tax avoidance schemes. In Australia, Uber was found to be underpaying its tax bill by about $30 million. $30 million. So Uber's sophisticated efforts to achieve little or no tax burden on multi-billion-dollar global revenues highlights a long-standing challenge governments face in enforcing tax compliance among wealthy corporations and individuals across its borders. And even Biden is talking about figuring out ways to reduce this. These challenges cost governments around the world $427 billion annually. These companies that we think that we love, that are really just taking advantage of people, are taking advantage of our federal governments as well. So let's take a look at how the Double Dutch program works. Basically, we got Uber at the top, right? Company A. And what they do now is they take their intellectual property and they license it or they sell it to a company that's owned by them overseas. By doing that, it's cost creating a large expense, and that company leases back that asset to the corporation, thereby allowing them to suck profits from that country to pay for leasing fees to another country. So all they're really doing is they're shifting income from a place that's taxable to a place that's not as taxable, right? So in Ireland, if that company is a tax resident in a tax haven, it's subject to 0% tax. And now they license it out to a Netherlands company, and then sub-license the revenue back to a tax resident in Ireland. And you can kind of see it kind of looks like a sandwich, right? You got subsidiary B in the middle. Subsidiary D looks like the ketchup. Subsidiary C is like the bun, and company A is the top of the bun. It's like they call that the double Dutch sandwich. So specifically, the way Uber is doing it is you have Uber right here. headquarters in San Francisco. That's a parent company. And then now they had issued their intellectual property out to a company called Uber International CV that's listed in Bermuda but licensed in the Netherlands, which is kind of crazy. And then they have different subsidiaries. So the way it works is Uber BV is billing the customer. Razier Operations is in the Netherlands is actually what's collecting your money when you swipe your card in Uber. 80% of the fare is returned to the driver. The driver gets paid. The fare payment is sent to Uber BV. And you can see how complicated the money flow is between each other to minimize the tax that Uber is paying to all the countries that it operates in. When I look at this, I sit and think to myself two things. Number one, damn, this is really cool. I wish I could participate in this because if I was able to save that kind of tax money, that's some serious money. But the other side of me also recognizes that to live in a civilized society today, with streets and roads and the military and the police and the firefighters, there has to be a payment made towards that. And when you have a company that's making billions of dollars per year, utilizing the assets of a country, yet not paying for their contribution to the wear and tear of that infrastructure, and yet the average citizens are the ones paying for it, is that truly fair, right? Is that capitalist notion of tax avoidance, is that really a fair thing? Now, I know Donald Trump said certain things like, well, the reason I don't pay much in taxes is because I'm smart. Totally get it. I understand it, and I can appreciate the reasoning behind why you want to minimize the tax. But if you're making money hand over fist and you're utilizing the infrastructure and the resources of that country, and on top of that too, the contractors that you are hiring to make your profits are struggling because they don't have benefits. Nobody's helping them pay for their tax obligations because they have all of these issues, right? As a contractor slash employee, shouldn't they be paying their fair share in some shape or form? I would love to hear your thoughts on that as I close this out. Like, pop in the comment section below. Are massive corporations in America paying too little in tax or too much in tax? I would love to hear what your thoughts are. Anyway, I just want to close with that thought. I make videos up here on YouTube on topics of finance and crypto and money mindset, and even like things like breath work and plant medicine to help you become a better person. And I would love, love, love to see you on here again as well. You know, I help you discover freedom and abundance in life. And I would love it if you would click the subscribe button. If you're new here, click on that little bell notification thing. If you haven't been part of this channel and you just happen to just drop by this page because you're like, man, how would I save money on my taxes? You're in the right place. With that said, I hope to see you again soon. Bring a friend and let me know what other topics you'd like me to talk about. With that said, have an awesome day. Take care. Peace.